What if the man who broke your heart, Eth, was the same one your daughter now calls her hero? What if the billionaire who vanished without a word returned, not with roses but soaked in rain, begging for a second chance at being a father? This isn't just a love story. It's the story of one unforgettable fall, one hospital bed, and one question that could change everything. Will she let him back in? The hum of the airplane was steady, almost calming, if not for the violent turbulence shaking the fuselage like a warning from the skies. Outside the window, darkness had swallowed the horizon, broken only by intermittent streaks of lightning that flashed across the clouds like nature's own fury. The captain's voice came through the intercom, tense and urgent, disrupting the illusion of luxury in the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a sudden and severe weather development, we are making an emergency landing at the nearest available airport. Please remain seated and follow all safety instructions. Julian Blackwood barely looked up from his tablet. His sharp grey eyes flicked across data, blueprints, and a spreadsheet of his upcoming urban security rollout in Toronto. The storm outside didn't faze him. Delays were a nuisance, not a threat. He had faced hostile corporate takeovers, litigation, wars, and boardroom betrayals. A little weather wasn't going to shake him. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke shirt, more annoyed by the idea of rearranging his schedule than the turbulence. His assistant's texts had stopped getting through. No, cell service in the sky, and that irritated him far more than the captain's announcement. Time was money, and he had already lost too much of both. 3 rows back in economy, Sierra Lane was gripping the armrest with one hand and her backpack with the other. She wasn't afraid of flying, but tonight's storm was different. It had a roar to it, a primal force that pressed against the windows and seemed to claw at the cabin. But her fear wasn't for herself. Her thoughts were 1,000 miles away, with her daughter Lily, likely curled up on the couch at home in Seattle, waiting for her to come back from a freelance assignment that was supposed to be in and out. The only reason she'd taken this job was the promise of quick pay. Sierra juggled 2 jobs as it was, waitressing and writing web copy at night, but this gig had been too good to pass up. She hated leaving Lily even for 2 days, but she needed the money. Rent was past due, the fridge was half empty, and her daughter needed new shoes. Sierra had done what she always did, made the hard choice and hoped it would work out. Now, with the flight careening toward a landing in a town she couldn't even name, all she could think about was Lily. She pulled her phone out, hoping for signal, but there was none. She blinked back the panic. She was a mother. Panic had no place in her toolbox. The plane landed hard, jolting across the runway with a screech that sent passengers' hearts into their throats. Julian's whiskey spilled across his lap, soaking into his suit trousers. He scowled, but said nothing. A lesser man might have cursed aloud. He simply wiped it with a linen napkin, stone-faced. Outside, the airport was hardly more than a shack with a flickering sign. There was no cell coverage, no taxis, no staff besides one exhausted-looking teenager who apologized profusely for the chaos and offered little else beyond a vague gesture down the road. There's a place called Rest Haven Inn. 2 blocks. Might have a room left, he mumbled, rain already soaking through his uniform. Julian didn't bother replying. He slung his bag over his shoulder and walked out into the storm without hesitation, his $5,000 shoes splashing through ankle-deep puddles. Sierra followed a few minutes. Later, drenched before she'd made it halfway down the road. Her backpack was slipping off her shoulder, water dripping into her collar. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this cold. She reached the inn just as Julian was pushing through the door. It was an old narrow building with wood, paneling, and a chipped neon sign buzzing above it. The kind of place that had character if you were feeling charitable, or mold if you weren't. The innkeeper looked up unsurprised. Only 1 room left. Double bed, small couch, take it or leave it. Julian didn't even blink. I'll take it, alone. A second later, Sierra walked in, dripping, panting, clearly as desperate for shelter as he was. The innkeeper raised a brow. You 2 can figure it out, that's all we've got. Julian's eyes narrowed. I'm not sharing a room. Sierra straightened, too tired to be intimidated. Neither am I. But unless you want to sleep in the lobby, I'd say we figure this out like adults. Julian turned toward the counter, exasperated. Fine. I'll take the couch. The room was as advertised, tight, dim, and old-fashioned. A single double bed, a threadbare sofa, and a table with a flickering lamp that looked like it had survived a dozen storms already. Julian set his suitcase down and took off his jacket, revealing the soaked sleeves of his dress shirt. Sierra wrung out her ponytail in the bathroom sink before emerging and sitting carefully on the bed. They didn't speak for a while. The air between them was heavy with exhaustion and wary silence. Then the power blinked off. Sierra inhaled sharply. She checked her phone. 1% battery. No signal. Her heart twisted. She thought about Lily again. She imagined her daughter waking up in the middle of the night and not finding her mom's voice. On the other end of the line, Julian noticed the tension in her face. He didn't say anything, but his brow furrowed slightly. "Do you have a kid?" she asked, suddenly breaking the silence. His answer was quiet. "I did." The way he said it made her stomach drop. She didn't ask more. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Julian gave a slight nod, and for a moment they sat there, two strangers soaked by a storm outside and by memories they didn't talk about. The room was small, but in that silence it felt endless. Then Sierra chuckled under her breath. "One bed, no way out," she said, shaking her head. Julian looked at her, eyes sharper now. "What?" "Sounds like a bad rom-com," she said. "Except in this version, I'm the broke single mom, and you're the cold CEO who probably owns half of Silicon Valley." He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. She pulled the covers up to her chest, lying back. "Just don't snore." Julian took the sofa, rigid and still. Outside, the storm howled on. Inside, two strangers lay in the dark, unaware that fate had just slammed two broken pieces together, waiting to see if they might fit. The silence inside. The small inn room was heavier than the storm still raging outside. Resthaven Inn, with its flickering lights and creaky wooden floorboards, felt like a forgotten relic from another era. The air was thick with dampness and tension, and neither Julian Blackwood nor Sierra Lane had the energy left to pretend they weren't acutely aware of each other's presence. The single lamp on the bedside table sputtered once, then died completely as the power gave in to the fury of the storm. For a moment, neither moved. Only the howling wind and rattling window pane filled the void. Then, in the near darkness, Sierra exhaled quietly and reached into her backpack, fumbling until she found a small battery-powered flashlight. She clicked it on and set it on the nightstand, casting a soft golden glow that barely lit the room but felt like a minor miracle in that moment. Julian sat stiffly on the couch, his tall frame clearly too large for the narrow space. He'd removed his coat, revealing a dress shirt that was still damp at the collar and sleeves. The fabric clung to him in ways that stripped away some of his CEO polish, exposing a human edge beneath the tailored perfection. He was motionless, arms crossed, eyes locked forward as if he could will himself elsewhere. But he couldn't. Not tonight. Sierra sat at the edge of the bed, her back straight, knees pulled up to her chest. She wasn't looking at him, but she felt him. Like static electricity, the presence of someone who didn't need to speak to be noticed. The moments passed slowly, filled with the subtle movements of two people trying too hard not to acknowledge. The person sharing their forced exile. She was the first to break the silence. "You don't talk much, do you?" Julian didn't look at her. "I say what needs to be said. Must be fun at dinner parties." A long pause, then a dry, almost imperceptible smirk played at the edge of his mouth. "I avoid those too." That made her smile, just barely. She leaned back against the headboard, letting the quiet stretch a little longer before continuing. "You know, when I boarded that plane, I thought the worst thing that could happen was a spilled drink or a crying baby." He glanced at her now barely. "I would have taken either over this." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of indignation crossing her face. "Wow, you're just full of charm." Julian looked away again, jaw clenched. "It's not personal." "That's the problem," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "Nothing about you ever seems personal." Something in her tone struck him, something honest, a kind of quiet challenge. He didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss her either. He just sat, his posture slowly softening as the room grew colder and the storm louder. After a while, Sierra shifted, reaching for her phone. The screen blinked, a single bar of signal. Hope sparked. She quickly dialed a number and held the switch. "Phone close, Mrs. Greta." Her voice was tight with anxiety. "Is Lily okay?" The voice on the other end was muffled, barely audible, but she caught enough to exhale in relief. "Good. Just tell her I love her. I'll be back as soon as I can." When she ended the call, Julian was watching her, his expression unreadable. "How old?" he asked quietly. She didn't look up. 7, What's her name? Lily. He nodded once, the smallest movement. You're raising her alone? Sierra finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired but steady. Yeah. Her dad didn't stick around. I figured out how to survive. How to smile even when I couldn't afford groceries. How to make a birthday feel special with homemade paper crowns and cupcakes from a mix. Julian said nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. You? She asked softly after a moment. I had a daughter, he replied. Emily. She was 6. The way he said her name was a whisper, like a memory pressed between 2 pages of a book he didn't want to reopen. Sierra didn't. Press. She didn't need to. Pain recognized pain. What happened? Julian's voice was flat, stripped of all business-like detachment. A mistake. A threat meant for me. Wrong place, wrong time. I lost them both. Sierra blinked, stunned by the simplicity of his words and the depth they carried. She looked down at her hands, fingers tightening. I'm so sorry. He didn't answer. But his posture had changed, less defensive, more open, as if simply saying it aloud had taken a toll, but also offered some small release. The flashlight dimmed slightly. Sierra leaned over to adjust it, her hand brushing against his. On the table, both froze. The touch was accidental but electric, a brief skin-warm jolt that neither expected nor moved away from fast enough. Sierra pulled her hand back first. Sorry. Julian didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the place where her fingers had been, as if trying to understand why such a simple gesture had unraveled a part of him. Do you always keep people out? She asked gently. I used to think it was safer that way. And now? He didn't answer. But in the quiet, in the hum of the storm and the fragile silence between them, something shifted. She lay back on the bed, pulling the blanket over her legs. Well, she murmured, eyes fluttering closed, you're stuck here with one of us human types for the night. Might want to recalibrate. Julian leaned back on the couch, his body protesting the position, his mind louder still. But somewhere, deep inside, beneath the rules and routines, the pain and precision, he felt the first quiet stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. He didn't know what it was yet. Only that, for the first time in a very long time, the silence didn't feel so lonely. And as the storm outside roared on, the distance between them felt imperceptibly smaller. The morning after the storm carried a strange stillness, like the world itself was holding its breath. The power had returned at some point in the early hours, flickering the lamp on the nightstand back to life in a weak amber glow. Sierra Lane woke slowly, her body stiff from unfamiliar sleep and her mind still foggy with fragmented dreams and the echo of thunder. She lay still for a moment, registering the quiet hum of electricity and the faint sound of movement nearby. Then she remembered where she was and who she was with. Julian Blackwood stood by the narrow window, his back to her, one hand resting on the windowsill, the other holding a phone to his ear. His voice was low, calm, clipped in a way that suggested business as usual. He was already dressed, though still a bit disheveled. His shirt freshly ironed but sleeves rolled, his hair damp from a quick shower or perhaps the lingering storm. No, I'll handle it remotely, he said into the phone. Send the documents through secure transfer. Yes, I'll be checking in later. He hung up and turned slightly, not surprised to find her awake. Their eyes met across the small space of the room. No words were exchanged, but something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement of the strange intimacy of the night before and the strange discomfort of the morning after. You're up early, Sierra said, her voice raspy. I don't sleep much, Julian replied simply. Habit. She sat up, rubbing her face. Guess billionaires don't need rest. He didn't smile, but his gaze softened. Not when there's always more to lose. The sentence lingered, suspended in the air longer than it should have. Sierra blinked, unsure how to respond to that kind of vulnerability from a man who had spent most of their shared hours fortified like a vault. They both got ready in silence. Julian packed quickly and efficiently. Sierra moved more slowly, still shaking off the remnants of emotional exhaustion. The storm had scattered something between them, but neither had the tools or the courage to name it. When they stepped out into the daylight, the town looked like a watercolor smudged by the night's rain. Roads were slick, trees bent at awkward angles, but there was a cautious pulse returning to the streets. The airport remained closed. Transportation was limited. The storm had left behind a minor disaster, and the two of them, it seemed, were still tethered to this place by Sheer circumstance. Sierra had a temporary job to get to, one she'd nearly forgotten about until she checked her messages. A local non-profit tied to an affordable housing project had reached out days ago, asking for an administrative assistant to help with document filing and community outreach. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid more than her cafe job and offered flexible hours while Lily was in school. She'd taken it, thinking she'd be home by now. But fate had other plans. Julian, needing something to occupy his time until his driver could find a route out, decided to personally check on a regional project under Carter Tech, a venture he normally would have left to regional leads. He claimed it was to assess delays due to the storm. The truth was simpler. He wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Neither of them expected the place they arrived at, Sierra to clock in, Julian to evaluate, to be one and the same. The community center was unassuming. A temporary office space inside a converted warehouse cluttered with folding tables, whiteboards covered in blueprints, and staffers moving with tired energy. Sierra pushed through the door first, hair tied up, holding a worn folder stuffed with forms and receipts. She was focused, in work mode, her thoughts on ticking tasks off her list. She looked up to find Julian already standing in the center of the room, surrounded by stunned assistants and site managers who suddenly looked unsure of how to breathe in his presence. He was tall and composed, every bit the executive, until his eyes met hers. Sierra stopped in her tracks. "You've got to be kidding me." Julian didn't blink. "You work here? I could ask you the same." They stood, two lines crossing again where they were never meant to. A beat passed. Then Sierra looked away, walked straight to her desk, and dropped her folder with a thud. "Great. Of all the buildings in Oregon." Julian watched her for a moment, then turned back to the group of waiting project leads who stammered through. A briefing about delays, roofing issues, and supply chain disruptions. But he only half listened. His eyes flicked occasionally toward the corner desk where Sierra sat typing. The door opened with a burst of laughter and the sound of tiny sneakers against the concrete floor. "Mom!" Lily rushed into the room, her hair wild and her backpack slipping off one shoulder. She waved a colorful drawing in the air and ran to Sierra, who caught her instinctively. "What are you doing here?" Sierra asked, laughing. "Mrs. Greta had to go to the doctor, but I finished my art project early." Lily turned and spotted Julian, her eyes wide with recognition. "It's you, the robot man." Julian blinked, caught entirely off guard. "Told my teacher you sat like a statue all night," Lily added proudly. "Are you still grumpy today?" The office staff chuckled under their breath. Julian was silent for a beat, then allowed a rare, reluctant smile to pull at the edge of his mouth. "Less grumpy," he admitted. Lily walked up to him and held out her picture. "This is you, and this is your superhero suit." He looked at the drawing. It was messy, bright, and full of energy. A figure with wild black hair and a stern face stood next to a girl in a cape. Sierra watched him carefully, unsure how he would respond. Julian knelt slowly, taking the paper from her hands, with surprising gentleness. "Thank you, Lily. I've never had a superhero suit before." Lily beamed. "You can borrow mine if you want." Sierra's heart squeezed at the sight. She didn't know what surprised her more, that her daughter had charmed the coldest man she'd ever met, or that Julian was allowing himself to be charmed. Julian stood and handed the picture back. "I think you wear it better." As Lily skipped away to color at another desk, Sierra approached him cautiously. "You didn't have to engage," she murmured. "I wanted to." Their eyes met again, no thunder this time, just something quieter, like rain falling on a still lake. Sierra turned away first. "Well, welcome to the team, I guess." Julian didn't reply, but for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel out of place. Not in this small town. Not in that makeshift office. And not beside the woman who'd called him grumpy and meant it, but who had also begun to see through the cracks he'd tried so hard to keep sealed. The days after their unexpected reunion blurred into a rhythm neither Julian nor Sierra had anticipated. What began as awkward encounters in a shared workspace slowly gave way to something subtler, more complex. Julian Blackwood, a man known for his emotional detachment and ruthless efficiency, found himself returning to the temporary Carter Tech office more frequently than necessary. And each time, without fail, his gaze drifted toward the woman at the corner desk and the little girl who ran to her arms each afternoon like it was the only place in the world that mattered. Sierra Lane moved through those days with her usual grace, but even she could feel the strange current building around them. She wasn't sure what to call it, she didn't dare name it hope, but it lingered between late afternoon coffee breaks and the rare flickers of warmth that occasionally softened Julian's impassive face. Still, she held herself back. She had been alone for too long, had been left too many times. Trust didn't come easily anymore. And yet she noticed the small ways he showed up. Julian began staying a few minutes longer after meetings, lingering by Lily's desk where she proudly displayed her latest superhero doodles. He responded to her questions, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with a dry humor that made Sierra's heart catch. Lily had a way of disarming him no one else ever had. She didn't treat him like a powerful man. She treated him like someone who needed a friend. One afternoon, Julian stood outside the project trailer as Sierra stepped out to take a call. He didn't mean to overhear. He'd been heading back inside, but her voice stopped him. "Please, I just need one more week. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm doing everything I can." There was a pause, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't want to drag Lily into this. Just don't evict us, please." Julian didn't move. She ended the call and stayed still for a long moment, the weight of desperation curling her shoulders inward before she squared them again, as if she could will herself strong. She turned around, mask of composure barely in place, and nearly ran into him. She opened her mouth to speak, but he said nothing, only offered the faintest nod, then stepped aside. She walked past him, back into the building, her back straight, her pride intact. That night, Julian made a phone call of his own. By morning, Sierra's landlord had received a full 3-month payment, anonymous, non-refundable. No message, no explanation. Julian didn't tell her. He didn't need her gratitude. In truth, he didn't even know why he did it, except that hearing her beg had stirred something in him he couldn't ignore, something that had been buried for years beneath contracts and profit margins. When Sierra found out, she was furious. She stormed into the office, a letter in her hand and fire in her eyes. Julian was standing at the workstation discussing structurals, timelines with a contractor. She didn't wait for the conversation to end. "Did you pay my rent?" she asked, holding the paper out like evidence of betrayal. Julian glanced at the letter, then at her. "I did." "Why?" Her voice shook. "Why would you do that without asking me?" "Because you needed it." "I didn't ask you," she snapped. "I've never asked you for anything." Julian set down his pen. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it so you could sleep at night." "Don't pretend this was some noble gesture," she said, chest rising and falling with each breath. "You don't know me. You don't get to play savior." "I'm not trying to save you," he said evenly. "I just didn't want to watch you fall." Sierra's lip trembled, but she steadied herself. "I've been falling and standing back up since Lily was born. You don't get to erase that with a wire transfer." He nodded slowly. "Then I won't do it again. Not unless you ask." She stared at him, caught off guard by the calm in his voice. He meant it. He wasn't trying to buy her. He wasn't trying to own her. He was just trying. "I don't need pity," she said quietly. "You don't inspire pity," he replied. "You inspire something else." The silence between them was fragile, but it didn't break. And from that day on, the space between them narrowed. Julian started noticing things about Sierra that others missed. The way she always brought 2 lunches, one for her and one for Lily, even when she barely had enough for herself. The way she stayed late to clean up other people's messes just to make tomorrow easier. The way she smiled at everyone, even when her eyes looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. And Sierra started seeing past Julian's cold exterior. She saw the way he looked at Lily, not with pity or forced affection, but with the kind of quiet awe that came from being reminded of something precious long buried. She saw how he softened when her daughter laughed, how he paused before answering her questions as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. She saw a man trying to relearn how to feel. One night, as they were locking up the office, Sierra turned to him. "You had a daughter," she said, not asking, just affirming. "Yes," Julian said softly. "Emily, she would have been 11 this year." "What happened?" He hesitated, then met her gaze. "A car bomb. Wrong place, wrong time. I was the target." Sierra's breath caught. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't strong enough to protect her, or her mother." She stepped closer. "You were human. I was careless," he corrected. "And I swore I'd never let myself care again, because caring meant risk, and risk..." He swallowed hard. Risk meant pain. Sierra nodded slowly. "You're still carrying it." Julian looked at her, truly looked. "Until recently I thought I always would." There was no kiss, No dramatic embrace. Just the sound of the wind brushing through the trees outside and the quiet ache of two. People standing on the edge of something neither of them had planned for. But something was beginning to grow between them. Not yet love. Not yet certainty. But trust maybe. Or the faint beginning of it. And for two people who had both learned to live in isolation, that was more terrifying and more sacred than anything they'd ever known. Julian Blackwood stood by the window of his temporary office in Oregon, watching the late afternoon sunlight stretch over the quiet construction site. From this distance, everything looked manageable, orderly. The blueprints on the walls behind him made sense. The SEA numbers in the reports balanced. His world, the one built on logic and control, seemed to remain intact. And yet, beneath the surface, he could feel it unraveling. It wasn't the project. It wasn't the storm. It was Sierra. It was Lily. Julian wasn't a man who stumbled, not in business and certainly not in his personal life, mostly because he had long since stopped allowing himself to have one. He had built walls that were seamless and high, made of grief and guilt and cold, disciplined silence. But now every interaction with Sierra chipped away at that fortress, and every smile from Lily left another fracture behind. The ache wasn't something he could control, and that terrified him. He had told himself that he was helping Sierra out of professionalism, out of basic human decency. But decency didn't explain why he remembered the exact curve of her smile when she teased him, or why he found himself reaching for his phone at night just to check for a message that never came. It didn't explain why Lily's laughter followed him into his dreams. He had let them in, and now he didn't know how to keep them out. One evening, after yet another long day pretending the spreadsheets were more interesting than the woman, just down the hall, Julian made a decision. He walked into the office where Sierra was finishing her shift. The space was mostly empty, the workers already gone. The only sounds the hum of the vending machine and the tapping of her keyboard. She looked up, startled. "You're still here?" "I need to talk to you," Julian said, his voice more serious than usual. Sierra's expression shifted. "Is something wrong?" Julian hesitated. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times in his head, but now, standing in front of her, every word felt too heavy, too dangerous. He ran a hand through his hair and took a breath. "I can't do this," he said, quietly. She froze. "Do what?" "This us, whatever this is turning into." The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Sierra slowly stood from her chair, her hands bracing the desk as if to steady herself. "Why?" Julian looked away. "Because it's getting too close. And I don't know how to protect you." "Protect me?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "From what?" "From me," he said, turning back to her. "From the risk of being part of my life. From what it means when you start to matter to someone like me." Sierra's eyes darkened. "You think being cared for is a danger?" "I think everyone I've ever loved has paid the price for it." She stepped around, the desk facing him head on now. "You think pushing us away is noble? You think this is protection?" "I think it's survival." Sierra's voice shook, but her spine stayed straight. "Julian, I have survived things you can't imagine. Do you know what it's like to bury your pride every month just to keep the lights on? To walk your kid to school and pray her shoes don't fall apart? To feel like the world only ever takes from you and still try to give love anyway?" She stepped closer, eyes fierce. "I don't need a protector. I need someone who doesn't run at the first sign of feeling something real." Julian said nothing, and that silence broke her. She shook her head, voice softening. "You know, for a man who has so much, you're still ruled by fear, and you're letting it make your choices for you." He looked down, his jaw clenched. She took a breath, swallowing the lump in her throat. "If you're going to leave, just leave. But don't pretend it's for me. Don't act like walking away is some kind of gift." Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. She turned back to her desk and didn't look at him again, and so he walked away. Back to his rental car, back to his hotel room, and, within 24 hours, back to his sleek, cold apartment in the heart of London. He stepped into his penthouse like a ghost into his old life. The lights were automated, the view expansive, the silence absolute. He resumed meetings, approved contracts, and read over quarterly forecasts. But nothing settled. He thought he could return to his world unchanged, but the world had changed. He had changed. Every night the memory of Sierra's voice echoed in his ears, and Lily's drawing sat folded in his briefcase, untouched but not forgotten. He hated how much space they took up inside him, how their absence made every success taste like ash. Across the ocean, Sierra kept herself together. She worked her shifts, she packed Lily's lunch, she paid the rent on her own. But the silence, left behind by Julian's departure, was a wound she couldn't explain, not to herself and not to her daughter. Lily stopped mentioning him after the first few days, but Sierra could see it in her eyes. The small glances toward the door, the way she still drew superhero capes for 3 figures instead of 2. She never asked why Julian had disappeared, but sometimes she sat quietly with that robotic dog in her lap, the one he'd given her, and said nothing. One afternoon, Sierra found her coloring in the living room, unusually quiet. "Hey," Sierra said gently. "Everything okay?" Lily nodded, then looked up. "Mom, do people leave because they're mad or because they're scared?" Sierra knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "Sometimes it's because they're scared," Lily leaned into her shoulder. "I hope he stops being scared." Sierra didn't cry. She couldn't afford to, not in front of her daughter, so she just held her. Neither of them knew that far away Julian was sitting in his office staring out over the London skyline, replaying every word of that final conversation. He thought leaving would protect them, but all it had done was prove how much he needed them, how much he couldn't forget what it felt like to be near something good, something real, and in his chest something cracked. The walls he had spent years building could no longer hold the truth that pressed against them. He had walked away from the only thing that had made him feel alive in years, and now it was too late. Or was it? It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Sierra Lane's world spun sideways. She had just come back from a shift at the cafe, balancing a grocery bag in one arm and trying to answer an email on her phone with the other when her neighbor came rushing up the stairs, panic in her eyes. "It's Lily," she said, breathless. "She fell outside the school. They've taken her to the ER." Sierra dropped everything. The bag crashed to the floor, eggs splattering across the linoleum. None of it mattered. Her daughter was hurt. The only thing that mattered in the world was getting to her. She barely remembered the ride to the hospital. The roads blurred through the tears she refused to let fall. Her mind spun with images. Lily crying, calling for her. What if it was serious? What if this time life took something from her she couldn't rebuild? At the ER desk she gave her name, her hands trembling. Lily Lane, 7 years old. She was brought in from the school. The nurse nodded, motioned for her to wait. "She's in with the pediatric team now. She's awake, but we're keeping her for observation. Possible concussion." Sierra sank into the nearest chair, pressing both palms over her face. Her lungs tightened, her heart refusing to settle. She needed someone to tell her it would be okay, but no one could. Not with certainty. Not with the kind of weight that would anchor her panic. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to the name she had tried so hard not to look at. Julian. She stared at it for a full minute, fighting with her pride, her anger, her heartbreak. Then she pressed call. The moment he answered, his voice cracked with something unfamiliar. Fear. "Sierra?" "It's Lily," she whispered, the dam finally breaking. "She's in the hospital. She's asking for you." There was no hesitation. "I'm coming." And then he was gone. Julian didn't stop to pack. He didn't notify his board or delay his calendar. Within 20 minutes, he was in a car headed to Heathrow. By the time his flight landed in Oregon, the sun had fallen behind the hills, casting long shadows over the small town that had once been nothing more than an unexpected detour. Now it felt like the center of everything. He stepped into the hospital, room breathless, soaked from a sprint through the rain. And there she was, Sierra, curled in a chair beside the bed, holding Lily's hand. Her eyes lifted when she saw him, and though her face didn't soften right away, her body did, just slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet. But not rejection either. Julian crossed the room slowly. Lily turned toward him, her eyes lighting up through the haze of fatigue and discomfort. "Uncle Jules," she said sleepily, a weak smile forming. He sank beside her bed, taking her tiny hand in his. "Hey, superhero," he said, voice rough. "You gave us all a scare." "I tripped," she mumbled. "My shoelace. The mean pavement won." Julian managed a broken smile. "We'll teach that pavement a lesson soon." Lily grinned faintly, then turned to her mother. "He came. Sierra nodded, brushing hair from Lily's forehead. Yeah, baby, he came. They stayed like that for hours. Julian never left her side, holding Lily's hand when she dozed, telling clumsy superhero stories when she stirred. Sierra watched him from across the room, and what she saw wasn't the man who'd walked out, afraid and guarded. It was someone changed, shaken, maybe, but raw in a way that felt real, human. In the quiet after midnight when Lily finally slept, deeply Julian turned to Sierra. I was wrong, he said. I thought leaving would protect you, but all I did was hurt you. I didn't trust myself to stay. I didn't believe I was strong enough to love someone again. Sierra didn't speak, her fingers twisted in the fabric of her jeans. She had dreamed of hearing him say this, but now that the words were here, they didn't land the way she thought they would. They didn't erase what he'd done, but they explained it. And that mattered. Julian went on. I need you to know, I love her. I love you, and I don't care what fear says anymore. I'm not leaving again. Sierra stood slowly and walked to the window. Rain traced slow paths down the glass. She let the silence stretch. Then with her back to him, she said, You broke something when you left. I know, he said, and it's going to take more than promises to fix it. I'll give you everything I have, he said. Time, honesty, patience, whatever it takes. She turned then, her eyes tired but resolute. Then start by being there. No grand gestures, no saving. Just stay. Julian nodded. I can do that. Weeks passed. Lily recovered faster than anyone expected, returning to school with new sneakers and a fierce story about her battle with concussive doom. Julian, true to his word, didn't leave. He bought a small house not far from the center. Nothing extravagant. Something quiet and close. And though Sierra protested, he let her handle the paperwork, the bills. He didn't swoop in this time. He just showed up. Every morning he walked Lily to school. Every night he sat with Sierra in the kitchen, helping with her freelance assignments, folding laundry, listening. They didn't name what was forming between them. They just let it be. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Julian fixed the broken umbrella Lily had insisted on keeping. The stitches were uneven, the handle still wobbled. But when he handed it to her with an awkward smile, she beamed as if he'd just gifted her the moon. You're better than any superhero, she told him. He knelt, arms open as she threw herself into them. Only because you two taught me how to be. And Sierra, standing at the doorway, arms folded and heart full, knew something had shifted permanently. The man who had once fled from love was now building it with each steady day. Not with declarations, but with presence. Eventually, under a slate-colored sky, Julian knelt again, this time in the mud, rain streaking down his face, holding out a simple silver band. I don't have a speech, he said. Just this. I want to wake up with you, laugh with you, fight through life with you, and if you'll have me, I want to be Lily's father in every way that matters. Sierra knelt beside him, their hands in the rain, her forehead against his. Already chose you, she whispered, the day you came back. And so they stood, the three of them, soaked and smiling, rain running through their laughter. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but whole. Finally, beautifully whole. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a storm or a CEO. It was about healing, redemption, and the courage to open your heart again. It taught us that even the most broken souls can find their way back to love, not through grand gestures, but through consistency, humility, and presence. Sometimes the family we long for isn't built by blood, but by choice and forgiveness. If this story moved you, reminded you of love's quiet power, or gave you hope, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels the next unforgettable chapter.